Well, hello everyone, and welcome to my presentation. I'm going to be talking about AI today and regulation and impact on process and corporate responsibility. Important things to know about when you're implementing AI. So here is an overview of what I'm going to be covering. I'm going to walk you through some legal implications, also to touch on a facial recognition case study, actually, which you might find quite relatable in terms of what your activities are. So first and foremost, a little bit about myself. So I'm the founder and CEO of Anaconda AI and Anaconda Consulting. And I'm a very, very experienced statutory director, legal director, and prior chief operating officer of an international technology group of many, many brands, with discrete entries at various stages from startup to mature and restructure stage. And the connection between AI and security is my experience in video and analytics, systems designed for national transportation networks, aerospace, retail, education, industrial processing, law enforcement, and so on. I'm a former chair of the BSIA, the British Security Industry Association, and remain close to the organisation, appointed as an honorary member. And I do a great amount of voluntary work with them to help raise standards and best practice, which I'll talk about in a moment. I also sit on a number of advisory boards for AI around the world. And I'm also a chair of the BSIA's AI and Biometrics Special Interest Group, fellow of the IOD, the Institute of Directors, which is crucial if you're a statutory director, and spend a lot of time influencing ethical AI standards and guidance around the world. And here on this slide, you can see a couple of examples. The Institute of Directors, AI in the Boardroom Governance, was written fundamentally by me, which my company now markets as a governance framework, and they have adopted the foundations, and that is sent out to their 20,000 members. And also as a lead author alongside colleagues of the BSIA's ethical and legal guide to facial recognition. So that's pictured here. So a little bit about Anaconda. I created the brand in 2016 and brought it to life a couple of years later. Actually, I didn't do it immediately. And it's focused on responsible AI. And the activities of the company are centered around confidential commercial research. So we're gathering real intelligence and know-how and proprietary knowledge for organisations, which they keep private. It's not public. It's not like academia. We help to set policy and governance for organisations, look at the impact and risk of the use of AI technologies. We operate across UK, the EU AI Act, which is very important, and the USA, and offer pre-compliance services for regulation. We're completely independent and vendor agnostic, although we do help vendors do things in an ethical way. We have a confidential large company and SME customer base. And some examples of our products and systems are AI governance for boards, our EU AI Act compliance services. We have a facial recognition, ethics and privacy impact risk assessment system, global partnership with Face Comply, and an AI risk intelligence system for biometrics and high-risk AI, which is all security focused around the EU AI Act. The company has been featured in the UK government portfolio of AI assurance techniques, and also the OECD, which is a global think tank for policy, for AI and other matters. And that's the tools and techniques to trustworthy AI. So onto the subject matter of today. And it's really to ask a number of questions and see if we can answer them. And the first is there any AI regulation in the UK to guide AI risk and corporate responsibility? And you see here, AI is growing up really quickly, and we've got the humanoid robot here, which we've already seen emerging in the security industry. In fact, the Boston Dynamics Spot the Dog has already been adopted and used in very advanced, difficult applications. So first and foremost, I wanted to talk about an AI definition. And this industry, security technology, knows a lot about AI, but it hasn't necessarily been described as such. And at the moment, the UK definition of AI is completely absent from legislation. And what I want to examine here is whether that matters. Does it matter to the supply chain? Does it matter to the user? Does it matter to the public? Well, probably yes. And I'll explain why that is. And of course, security and technology, tech has been prolific, but we've seen multiple AI hype cycles over the years. And what you see on the right is the Gartner hype cycle, which is a known model that innovators use to try and determine at what stage the development is actually at in terms of exciting the market. Investors pile in, lots of money, there's lots of expectation. But because AI is extremely difficult and many technologies are very difficult to commercialize and make work in many different scenarios, you see this trough of disillusionment. And obviously much more work needed to actually test and try the technology and the applications. And you start to see the green shoots and then a plateau of productivity, which is when the AI start to be adopted. And I would suggest that many of the AIs in the security domain are at that plateau of productivity. But what's happened over time, because of the cycle, because of the trough of disillusionment, some vendors deny AI exists at all. And you have this debate around whether it's AI or not, in the true sense of the word artificial intelligence. But actually, the techniques that underlie automated processing activities, autonomy, are in the realm of AI. But there's also been no regulation or certification or standardization of these technologies. Lots of buzzwords, just made up words to frame what something is. No consistency. It leads to confusion. So it's really, really crucial as these technologies are adopted and used more frequently that they can be explained, that they're transparent about what they're doing, that if you're exposed to the technology, you know and are aware of what you're being exposed to. And importantly, in the commercial world, the buyers, the procurement organisations really need to know what's being embedded in the processes, whether there might be an impact downstream from that technology. Because in security, it's the built environment, it's transportation, it's infrastructure. The technology gets designed into very big systems. So it's extremely important that the buyer is aware of what they're buying and what the implications may be. And even more so with generative AI, which is your chat GPT, chatbots and knowledge systems. We have a belief that a lack of regulation of AI, and we were talking 20 years of AI here, has stifled innovation to an extent due to trust. And that's because there have been no consistent ways of doing things, which lead to confidence in designing in the technology into industrial systems. We're quite encouraged by the new EU AI Act, which will hold the entire value chain to account, including the developer. So it's possible to understand and query what is in that AI, what's it doing. The technical documentation has to be consistent. And importantly, there's a trace right the way through, bringing the developer and the end user closer together. They have to be continually talking, which in the industrial world is definitely a good thing. So looking at the AI definition, the global definition of AI, as I will describe it, has emerged from the OECD, which is the global think tank. And this definition has now been adopted in the EU, essentially defining a very simple set of guidelines with regard to how to identify whether it's AI or not. It's obviously computer-based, machine-based. It can, for explicit or implicit objectives, it can make inferences from the inputs. It can figure out how to do things. So you think about facial recognition software, it's definitely figuring out how to do something. And its outputs can influence the physical or virtual environment. And in addition to this definition is that the different AI systems can vary in their levels of autonomy and adaptiveness after deployment, so the self-learning elements, such as the generative AI models. You can go and research and have a look at OECD AI. It is very accessible. It's in non-technical language. And there are a couple of diagrams that I've lifted from it there, which you can go and have a look at, which really help to explain how AI works in a consistent way. Now, in the UK, the definition has been partly adopted informally to focus on autonomy and adaptiveness, which is good, but we would like to see that going further. So with regard to UK AI regulations, I'll outline what has happened and where it's heading. So there was a white paper set out by the government which set a non-statutory framework, which really adopted a responsible AI approach to what we call the classic AIs. So not ChatGPT based technologies. And then the AI Safety Summit resulted in the Bletchley Agreement, which in effect then resulted in the AI Safety Institute. And this is designed to be testing and assessing the risk of the generative AI, which is really good. So that is a really big step forward. In terms of all the AIs that are out there that buyers are thinking of purchasing, there is still quite a loose framework around that, and they're based on the OECD principles, which are an extremely good start point. And they're listed here, such as safety, security, robustness, transparency and explainability that I mentioned earlier. So do you know that you're being exposed to it, how it's doing things, how does it reach its decisions? Is it biased? Is it fair? Is the proper accountability in place and governance? And is it possible to contest it and achieve redress if there is harm? So these are the principles in the UK. It's good because they're global principles. So anyone in this space, if they start on a journey towards setting out some policies, you cannot go wrong if you adopt the OECD principles. So with this sort of partially complete regulatory system in the UK, how can AI actually be responsible and ethical? And I will underline that the legal framework is not there yet. AI is not specifically defined in law. It is not mentioned in any piece of legislation at all. And as the England and Wales common law system, I'll focus on England and Wales as an example, the law is laid out in legislation, but also through precedent in case law. So things have to happen for judges and really to make determinations whether things should be interpreted in a certain way. And so different statutes are being applied which don't quite fit AI. In terms of where this is going, we've got the responsible AI framework. So as I mentioned, the OECD principles are at the heart of that. Really great work by the CDEI, which is now called the Responsible Technology Adoption Unit. And you can go onto that and you can see different tools and techniques. You'll find Anna Cantor's tools and techniques there, which help those who are using or developing AI technologies to find risk frameworks and tools that might help them in their particular sectors. But really important steps have been made. Global standards are emerging. The 42001 AI Management System Standard has been recommended by UK government for international interoperability, which is a great step forward because that's at the heart of the EU AI Act. So there's only one investment that you don't have to do different quality management systems for different regions. So I think in effect, it's fair to say that the UK blends a kind of voluntary responsible AI practice and what look like plans for regulatory oversight, although I think it's unlikely that's going to happen in the near term. And there is a central government AI risk function forming, which will review the regulators' proposals or concerns that may emerge as AI is adopted. I'm not going to go through every detail on this. You can access it on the government website, but it gives you an overview of how the regulators are, their relationship, the juxtaposition between their activities and information coming in from the ecosystem, central function and industry, and the regulators sitting there in pink. And there is a Digital Regulators Cooperation Forum, which comprises Ofcom, CMA, ICO, Competition and Markets Authority, ICO and the FCA, to get together and look at the highest risks and also commonality across their regulatory domains. So there's all good work happening there. One thing that I wanted to pick out for this presentation is the focus on deepfakes. It is a really significant concern for the security domain and also has been cited as a regulation priority as following the testing and so on. And there is a call out for developers to come forward and come up with ways of detecting deepfakes. This is a government call that came out of the consultation. And if you're not aware of what deepfakes are, I would suggest that those in the security domain probably do. But if you're not, generative AI is actually at the heart of them. Before ChatGPT, you have to put two networks together in order to generate a deep fake, except the technology has just got much, much better bigger, better, faster. So now Gen AI can create deepfakes that are highly convincing and highly credible. Gen AI is also used to generate synthetic data to extend training models to improve the demographic, let's say, for facial recognition software. So it's a very beneficial technology. You wouldn't want to stop doing this, but you definitely want to stop deepfakes. And we certainly believe that it's only a matter of time before there will be a serious miscarriage of justice or an unsafe acquittal. And at the moment, there is no plan in legislation to require traceability to source, although the security domain has been grappling with this problem for 20 years. In fact, some of my early work in this industry involved looking at the acceptance of digital evidence from video surveillance systems in court. And one element of that was looking at what the developers could do to actually mark, so to include some kind of authenticity test within their video. And at the time, there just wasn't the processing power and technology available to do that, but it's back on the agenda. So all we have at the moment is a transparency requirement, which is emerging in Europe, to mark the video to say that it's synthetic, which is important. But preventing the election interference is really important for UK government and any government. It's critical to democracy. And we're already seeing socially engineered deepfake attacks emerging, for example, an impersonation of an authority figure in a business, in a corporate structure, giving instructions to transfer money, which may compromise security and access may be allowed and so on. But this is actually happening now, so it is pretty urgent. And those in the security domain really need to be aware of the risks here and dust down their cyber security policies as an absolute minimum and check everything is as it should be. So I mentioned talking about a case study. Classic AI regulation is quite loose in the UK based on principles. And I'll walk through how that works in the UK. And this case study is about facial recognition technology. And a little bit of background in this, it is an AI-based technology. And it's a narrow AI, or you could describe it as an expert system. So it's performing a very narrow task. And let's say its basis is rooted in object detection. So finding things in images which could detect the presence of a person in a restricted area. There's been a lot of developments in technology emerging in that space for remote monitoring capabilities. It's now being used to do things like check whether the correct PPE is used, and facial recognition software is another step on from that. Generally, it's a mix of processing techniques, and you would probably have heard of machine learning, supervised, unsupervised, learning, reinforcement learning, regression. These are all techniques that can be used to process data and ask it to infer and create a probability whether something might be the case. There's a lot of deep learning and neural networks in video object detection. And these are slightly different from foundational AI models, so they have different names, which again makes it confusing. General purpose AI, foundation AI models, frontier AI, generative AI. They're supercharged networks of networks, lots of neural networks stuck together, really, is a very simple way of thinking about them. And that is the technology at the heart of the large language models, OpenAI, ChatGPT, Meta's Llama, Google, Gemini, and so on. And so what's different about those models is that they can be adapted to the applications. So you could actually take what we describe as an ensemble of AI techniques, or the British pronunciation is actually the French pronunciation ensemble. But, you could add some Gen AI to that and make that super effective at querying its own data. So it's definitely beneficial. So on to facial recognition as an AI technology. It is AI, but it's not actually recognised as such in any draft regulation proposals or current regulatory frameworks at the moment, although it does meet the OECD definition for AI. And dependent on the use case, the risks are different and potential harms may arise. on the basis of those different use cases. We tend to, as individuals, we tend to interact with verification, which is a one-to-one process when you authenticate your banking transaction, or maybe you gain access to your laptop. That's one-to-one. And the contentious issue surrounds one-to-many, which is identification, not necessarily always in public places, but that tends to be how it's used. For crowd control, and privately owned public places, but nevertheless to keep those places safe. And the bones of contention here is not just the technology; it's who's using it, where are they using it, when are they using it, and why are they using it. And it could be the police, and it could be private companies. And in the UK, the rules that are being applied to these different use cases are very different. For example, for private use, an organisation really needs to understand their GDPR, or the Data Protection Act 2018 requirements that brought GDPR into the UK as UK GDPR. It's very important because the biometric element of facial recognition sits within GDPR. So does automated decision making. So there are a few traps in there. Also, the Equality Act is a significant consideration in terms of the watch list, also the training data in the actual technology. For public authority use, they must comply with the Human Rights Act of 1998, which brought the European Convention of Human Rights into the UK law, and also GDPR, the Equality Act, and public sector equality duty. And for law enforcement use, you then got, in addition to those, PACE, NPCC guidelines, Face the Camera, which is an excellent document written by one of the former surveillance camera commissioners. But fundamentally, the force set the rules in terms of when, where, and who is actually operating the facial recognition software. We're a bit concerned that the Biometrics and Surveillance Camera Commissioner function is going to be absorbed into the new Data Protection and Digital Information Bill, and by implication, the code of practice there will disappear. The various organisations are querying that, to ask the question, is that really the right thing to do? And it's, of course, been under scrutiny since the Bridges case, which was a judicial review of the use of police deployments. So there's a bit going on there, and it's not totally clear. So it's obvious that something had to be done if the government was focusing on other areas. Just as a matter of interest for those who operate internationally, the Europe's approach to remote biometrics, so collecting biometric data without being in physical contact with the individual, and biometric categorization, it is covered by AI regulation in Europe under the EU AI Act, which will become law in all 27 member states by the end of June 24. That's the latest update from the EU. So how can you do this in the UK and do it responsibly without falling down a rabbit hole and stepping on the traps that do sit in GDPR? With good reason. GDPR is a very good piece of legislation, but it's data. It's about data rather than the interaction between the product and technology with the outside world. So there is a gap. And how that's being addressed is that the sector is producing domain guidance, which has been created by developers and users of the technology. And I'll give you an example, and that's the BSIA's guidance to the ethical and legal use of facial recognition software, which embeds the OECD principles, and they're slightly reorganised to make them easier to understand in the context of facial recognition software. And this guidance actually was adopted and published by the Home Office in the UK as very useful, helpful guidance to ethical and legal use. So you can see the screen grab from the Home Office website. The legal framework is drawn from GDPR, and it's really signposting to go and look at GDPR. And an important factor in this guide is that it does state that only if the legal and ethical principles are satisfied. The legal principles you have to comply with. The ethical ones can appear a bit arbitrary, but we don't think so. It's absolutely vital. But there is a caveat that if you can't do this, then please don't go ahead. And we took that further, which I'll explain in a second. This slide shows examples of the very easy to interpret diagrams that explain how facial recognition works. And then the COG system is showing what the GDPR requirements are that have to be met. And then to take this a step further, so the new FRT standard operationalizes responsible AI principles. And I'll explain what that means, because principles are quite ethereal and difficult to put into practice. So we've written a standard that allows that interpretation and almost checklist approach. So this new standard is the BS 9347 standard for the ethical use and deployment of facial recognition software and video surveillance systems. It was developed using the basis of the OECD and European high-level expert group principles, which, in addition to being globally adopted, they're also part of the guidance notes in the EU AI Act for all AI. It's good practice. The entire value chain is activated to conform to the principles. So each actor in this chain has a set of requirements they need to meet, from the developer, from the system integrator, and the deployer and user. The need is challenged, and if the needs can be met in some other way, then other technologies or systems are encouraged. And responsible AI principles are used to monitor and manage the effects of the facial recognition software during the use. Feedback to the developer is encouraged to provide updates if there's bias or any other harms appear. There is a requirement for human in the loop for all decisions which may affect individuals, but crucially on that subject, that the human in the loop really does need to be trained to do that, because in fact humans aren't that good at identifying people, even if there are two images side by side. So that training is crucial. Also, what agency do the decision makers actually have at the front line, and who takes the ultimate accountability for the decision and the action that is taken, which can be extremely privacy impacting if they get it wrong. So it's encouraged that this is treated with extreme caution, and importantly, the professionalism that's applied to other areas of the security domain and frontline interventions. Important aspect of this needs assessment is that it recommends that the use should be ceased if harms are discovered. And also, if you can't meet the requirements of the standard, you don't do it. So this is an industry that develops and uses technology, saying you really shouldn't be doing that in that context. And everyone around the table said, yeah, we're happy to say that. We're not trying to whitewash and wallpaper over the risks. There are some risks that can't be overcome, in which case you don't deploy the technology. So the structure of the standard actually could be applied to any narrow AI system. And it is the only standard that we're aware of that actually operationalizes the OECD principles. So we see it as a bit of a blueprint and a benchmark moving forward. So I wanted to give you an example of how to implement and manage AI responsibly in the UK. And this is for AI regulatory compliance as it is emerging, and international interoperability. And these are example questions that my team go and ask when they sit with the developers and the users, which is in effect really teasing out what the values are at the basis of the decisions that are being made. And some of the questions include looking beyond the development cycle for the developers to understand whether there is a diverse perspective, who is around the table, are the right people around the table, are the experts in the use case around the table, for example. Is the development team an echo chamber? And that means they all agree with each other. And there's nobody saying, hang on a minute, what about this? Is the organisation diverse? Can it see bias? And we look at this frequently, whereby you have a board which is not diverse at all, yet they claim their organisations are diverse, and we just don't believe these things match. So it's a real consideration. You can't whitewash EDI. It's got to be right the way through to the accountable body in that organisation, because otherwise it can't see bias. And those who are raising the issues about bias will not be heard if the board isn't diverse. And that's a very strong point not everybody wants to hear. So what are the use cases? Just skipping through. So is the AI system trained and tested for bias? Non-diverse teams are less likely to see bias. So the common libraries, where did they come from? Where did the data come from? Should they have it? Is there an AI risk management system in place? Has the real scenario testing being undertaken? What ethical principles are being used and implemented? Where's the system going to be used? Have all those use cases been defined? And that's important because for EU AI Act compliance, the developer has to actually explain how this system should be used. And to do that, covering all scenarios, because when it's in the user's hands, the user will follow what the developer says. And if they find deviations from that, then they have to go back to the developer and say, hey, we're using your system and it does all these things that aren't in the documentation. And if there's no response to that, they have to report it to the authorities to ensure that there isn't an AI system out there that's doing something that may be creating unintended consequences and harms to people. So this gives you an example. This is not a trivial process, and it's embodied in actually our underlying values as an organisation, and it's asking whose perspectives are in the room. So it's very important to understand whose perspectives are in the room. And we use the elephant and the blind people paradigm, which is at the heart of Anna Kanter's values. And in fact, what this means is that each person has a small piece of the picture. None of them can identify what this animal is, although they know what an elephant is. But given a small piece, they can't provide the full picture. It's only when they're unmasked and they put all of their views together that it's possible to see that this is an elephant. And this applies to AI development, to training data, to the people in the room. Do they have the right view of this subject? And we use this paradigm in a different way in business. We talk about the big picture. We also talk about seeing an elephant through a pinhole. Are we only getting a narrow view? And this is why AI development is so different from other technologies, because it has such a wide range of impacts that need to be considered. It's not trivial. So moving on to responsible AI. Well, it isn't free. And that's something I do stress, that to implement it professionally, there is a cost and time involved, and money has to be put aside. And that's estimated to be roughly 10% of the AI budget, according to Accenture's research into this subject. And if you look at the AI market, which is estimated to get to 15 trillion by 2030 in terms of enhancing GDP globally, there's a significant reason for doing this in a way that actually manages this technology right the way through the life cycle. So the start point is recognising the AI is being developed, reviewing all departments and implementations for large language models, Gen AI, biometrics, facial recognition software, and that's something you're going to have to do for EU AI Act compliance. So it's not time that is just consumed without any tangible benefit. Boards are setting high-level policies already, defining the purpose, and so on. And the tools and techniques are available that I've explained. There are links there that you can go and have a look at and download some of these systems. Consider the new AI management system, the 42001, apply the OECD principles, set goals, monitor and review, explain and be transparent, cease use if harms are concerned, and mitigate harms, report to the regulator, make sure there's independent review to avoid groupthink and the echo chamber. And just one thing to be mindful of, internal teams, development teams may not have the autonomy or psychological safety to raise concerns, because there is a power dynamic and a power gradient between the employee and the board and shareholders of an organisation. It's not always great for them to have to raise these concerns. Often, if an independent does that, then it allows them to just continue with what they're doing, but they have raised it and it can be dealt with in a different way. So these frameworks I talked about, so just to touch on those, where you can get them beyond the portfolio of AI assurance techniques, Anaconda has professional frameworks, and we do perform evaluations and risk assessments. There are sector-specific frameworks which have been developed, such as the BSIA Guide to the Ethical Legal Use and the Standard, BS 9347, and there are standards coming through BSI, ISO, IEC, IEEE, NIST, which is American organisation, and the trade associations are very active in providing high-level guidance to get started. But be mindful that that is not legal advice, nor is it going to deal with your specific use case. We believe, and in fact Accenture believes, that in the competitive marketplace, commercial entities wish to avoid reputational harm, but use best practice as a way of showing that they're better and more responsible than other companies. And this practice drives competitiveness. Here are some examples of the standards that I've talked about. The one at the bottom of the list is second to bottom, the 22989, the AI definitions, is actually free issue. So you can go and download that and not have to pay for it. And in conclusion, in the UK, because of there being no regulation, responsible AI has to be the trust and success factor for business. So doing it the right way and saying you're doing it the right way. And in fact, back to the Accenture research, they have cited that high performance companies are 53% more likely than others to be responsible by design. So they established a correlation between responsible development and success because it engenders trust and an openness to have the dialogue about things and not just claim that everything works without any pitfalls, which is not a good thing to do in AI. So there are some existing UK regulatory traps for FRT, so for facial recognition and biometrics, which really must be navigated. There is a tension currently between public use, which seems unlimited, versus private use, which is being restricted in the UK. So there's some elements there that need careful consideration. And of course, international organisations should set out interoperability policies as soon as possible, because they will just do it once and then that will work everywhere. And we certainly recommend start taking the steps towards the AI Management System Standard 42001, which, although we accept the certification bodies aren't ready and there is a skills shortage when it comes to auditors and people to go and do the certifications, it doesn't stop companies from doing the pre-compliance work, which is very important. So that concludes my presentation. There is a list of further guidance. I won't go through every single one, but there's a lot of public information you can get to, and also professional guidance that you can access. So that's it for me.
Hi, Pauline. Thank you so much for joining us again at Security BioLive and for delivering another fantastic session on AI. I feel like every single year I get my AI update from you, the expert of all things artificial intelligence. So thank you so much. Just to delve straight into some questions, during your presentation, you mentioned that AI has been around obviously for quite a while, 20 years or so. So I'm interested to know, why is it only now that we're starting to see this innovation or popularity and adoption of this technology?
In the security domain, there are a number of factors at play there. One is that the processing power, the ability to acquire training data and interpret a wide range of situations, has been limited in the past. And as the technology, the ability to process, so you've got to have the processing and you've got to have the ability to write the code that undertakes the analysis. And many neural networks need to be trained to do certain things, and that training data just hasn't been available. So putting those factors together, that's suddenly improved, or has improved certainly in the recent years. Equally, you could argue that slow adoption has been arising as a result of lack of regulation, because in high-risk sectors, the decisions that have to be made have to be certain. And that applies in many industrial scenarios. It cannot be a vague guess and probability. And this is one of the reasons why facial recognition software has taken so long to become a trusted technology, because the probability of it being the right person could only be within a certain range, which isn't good enough if you are having to do an intervention of some kind, which could be seriously privacy impacting on that individual. It has to be more certain. And now the technologies are so accurate. They are really being trusted. So if there'd been regulation, that would have stimulated some action, including some minimum standards, for the technology, and maybe even certification, which we would be a great supporter of.
Definitely. And I completely agree. And especially when it comes to obviously the biometric side, like you just said, I think where there was this lack of innovation or lack of regulations and capability of technology in the past, it's also led to a lot of misconceptions as well, which doesn't help, when you're trying to, fully and accurately analyze the risks and the practicalities of it, as well as innovate. So it's been a double-edged sword, I suppose, over the last 10 years or so. But it's quite exciting to see where it's coming now, providing we can do it in a safe and responsible way. And moving on to the regulation side of things, obviously you were kind of expert in all things standards and regulations. So given your knowledge of the new EU AI Act, obviously that's set to kind of hit everybody rapidly, well, very, very imminently. In your opinion, do you think that there's any areas from that require, whether it's further clarity or further framework in the future?
Yes, I think there's always something to be done. And that trying to achieve perfection can get in the way of the good. And in reality, EU AI Act is more than good. It's really excellent, and it covers risk. It treats AI as a product. It treats horizontal risks, as they're described, that would be across sectors, also very specific domain risks. That is very solid. But it is mainly focused around classic AIs. What I would say is that as generative AI and the foundation models become more powerful, the Act is going to have to respond to that quite quickly. And as technology was emerging, and this is one of the arguments against regulation, that it can't keep up. And there's some validity in that, but that is not a reason to do nothing. So let's get something laid down, but have the mechanism in place to adjust quickly. And EU are very much ready for that. And certainly the foundation models, the generative AI aspect of the regulation needs to evolve really quickly and keep in step with what's happening. At the moment, the guidelines are, you could describe them as vague, with more guidance to come. And the models that are cited as potentially causing systemic risks, they are evaluated on the basis of the training data and the processing required to train them, which is got to do it once. Someone's got to start with this. So I'm certain that this will evolve and become much more fine-tuned to be able to track the development of the Gen AI models.
Definitely. And it's always easier to adapt a foundation that you already have, as opposed to frantically trying to write a comprehensive document when something's already happened and it's too far. We've already had some of those use cases in history where, when it comes to AI, where something's happened and we've gone, oh my gosh, look at the risks that have been associated with this. Oh my God, this could have gone so much worse. In order to prevent that, those standardizations, those kind of frameworks, code of practice coming in can definitely help funnel people into an innovation road as opposed to just a free-for-all. Definitely. And you also focus a little bit on deep fakes towards the end of your presentation and generative AI, like we just mentioned. And Gen AI is quite an incredible technology, but it's also quite scary. I think the latest ChatGPT update, I believe, was a higher IQ than Einstein. So given this kind of rapid evolution, this update has only come, about approximately a year or so after its original inception, and its changes has been, quite monumental over this time. How can we hope to keep up technologically and to put these guardrails in place?
So, okay, an IQ is measured in measured in a certain way, and tests have been developed by psychologists in order to do that. And that is just one dimension of intelligence. And there are other forms of intelligence that go alongside that, in terms of somebody may be musically intelligent, somebody may be physically intelligent, in that they're very, they can dance. Can AI dance? These things are getting closer, but what I would suggest at the moment, this test, high IQ isn't necessarily the only dimension of intelligence which causes the technology to function in a way which is more like a human, because we're much more than just an IQ. And in fact, if you look at, for example, board development and leadership development, as we do when we become directors, the dimensions of intelligence go way beyond IQ. You can work out the solution, but you also have to have emotional intelligence. So you have to be able to interact with people and understand people and what they may be feeling and how they may be responding to what they may feel as an instruction. Were they part of that? This is about leadership. This is bringing people along to make them feel that it was their decision to do something. AI isn't there with that yet, but I'm not discounting it. In reality, there is great potential for AIs to become so human-like that we have this situation that's happening now, it's been examined now, which is the anthropomorphism element, whereby humans don't know if they're interacting with a machine, and they may develop emotional bonds which might be quite harmful to them when they find that it's actually a machine. And so everything you've seen in sci-fi is kind of unfolding, because with AI, if you can imagine it, it can probably be done. And the barriers in the way of that are, power processing, silicon, and the only line that is really the one that stops things is the ethical approach.
Definitely. I mean, I think my wife probably loves Alexa more than me at the moment, because she listens a lot more. So, but yeah.
Yeah, but that's, that technology's there. It sounds like a human though, doesn't it?
Yeah. No, it's
you've got someone talking to you.
And we watched Mission Impossible last night, so it's one of those things where you start to see it in all these films, or and
of course.
It's concerning. It's exciting, but it's concerning.
Yeah.
And I think as soon as AI conquers, like you said, that emotional intelligence, I think that is one of the most human traits, like you said, and identifications, that ability to be able to read people and read body language and that kind of psychology behind it. So that'll be a slightly concerning time. But
and I'll give you an example. So a doctor, a GP, for example, so the front line of primary care in the UK with our National Health Service, a doctor can tell if someone is not well just by looking into their eyes. Yet a GP chatbot has no chance, because it's just processing data, as opposed to a human actually seeing another human and how they look.
Definitely. And just moving on to our final question, you also explored facial recognition and how it is not being fully recognised at the moment as an AI technology, despite this perhaps being probably one of the biggest threats when it comes to the misuse of AI and data, and more so in the public space. So I'm interested to know kind of what is like the primary reason or the primary difference between private and public use, and why is it so controversially different at the moment?
So it's quite a complicated answer, actually, and there's lots of case law rooted in this. But fundamentally, if I describe that in the UK, facial recognition software is divided into photographs and then processing of those photographs. And the processing to extract biometric data sits under GDPR, which is data processing law, very, very important and valid and relevant to facial recognition software. But it doesn't address the whole system and how it interacts with the outside world. And that's where the EU AI Act has addressed this and categorised facial recognition software as remote biometric identification and classified it completely in law. In the UK, we have a split. So the technology has been broken down and into these components. Then the public use is very much centred around solving crime by any means, which is totally valid. However, we have, because of the legal system in the UK being made up of legislation and case law, so it means that it's case law that really determines whether a use case is a problem or not. And until the police have a strong set of guidelines, and I would say they would welcome this. They would welcome a piece of legislation. So individual officers don't have to make the decision about whether they have the right rules in place, because that's what it boils down to with regard to where and when they use the technology. But the government in the UK is very happy to, and in fact is investing 55 million into the acquisition of police vehicles with facial recognition software, such it can be used. And it is very effective. I mean, we cannot deny that. It serves the public good, and it can solve crime and find people who are trying to harm us. And we don't want that in society. However, it does need strong guardrails, and those aren't there in the public sector at the moment. In the private sector, one could argue that the only instrument available to the private sector is GDPR. And we have a regulator, the ICO, that is desperately trying to make this work. And they probably are the right regulator for AI, but they need the right instrument in order to be able to do that. So what's happening is, well, it's biometric processing, and that is prohibited under GDPR, unless you satisfy the requirements with regard to consent, valid consent, and also whether there are a number. I won't go through all of them, but these are at odds with each other currently.
Well, thank you, Pauline, for telling us a little bit more about AI. And I know that we're going to delve into this in our panel discussion as well. As per usual, I really appreciate your time and for giving us an insight into the latest regulation update. If anybody has any further questions, they can reach out to Pauline on the platform or via LinkedIn or through Anacanter AI. And thank you again, Pauline.
Thank you.